Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Snow fell over Manhattan that night in a way that made the whole city look like a snow globe. Someone was gently shaking, and Daniel Foster, wrapped in a charcoal wool coat, his scarf wound a little too tightly around his neck, the way he always did when he was tense, stood still for a few seconds in front of the glass door of Casa di Maclareno, the Italian restaurant whose golden lights spun across the ceiling and cast a honey-soft glow that made everything appear a little more magical, a little warmer, and a little more ruthless when the heart looking into it was empty. A cold wind blew from the avenue, making the strands of hair on his forehead tremble, and the hand inside his coat pocket shook slightly, not from the temperature, but from the small, persistent fear that had stayed with him for 4 long years. The feeling of a man who had forgotten what it was like to walk into a room without carrying the shadow of loss behind him. He exhaled, his warm breath fogging the glass for a fleeting moment, then murmured to himself like a quiet reminder, sinking deep. For her, for Ellie. Ellie, his 5-year-old daughter with cotton soft curls and almond brown eyes that looked at him every morning as if the world was still full of wonder. Even though her mother had passed away 4 years ago on an afternoon so peaceful, no one could have imagined it would steal a woman from her family with such devastating gentleness. Daniel pushed the door open. The little bell above the entrance chimed, a delicate note that drifted into the warm space of the restaurant and made him feel as if he had stepped from a cold world into a place where everyone had someone to laugh with. Heat enveloped his skin instantly. The scent of tomato sauce, basil, and toasted bread wove together like a soft greeting, and the faint classic jazz music played at just the right volume to make someone feel they were living inside a film frame. Something elegant, something romantic, something he hadn't dared to dream of in a long time. He was led to a table by the window, where strings of Christmas lights along the street formed trembling lines of brightness with every gust of winter wind, and sat down with the sensation that his heart was losing what little rhythm it still kept. Daniel opened his wallet, his hands clumsy as though facing some sacred ritual. Inside the small pocket was a photo of Ellie, smiling brightly, chocolate smeared across her cheek from eating too fast. And that picture felt like a tiny gold lantern in the dark, reminding him he was not going out to find new love. He was simply reaching for a chance at something less lonely, something that might eventually give Ellie one more person to say good night to at the end of her day. He brushed a finger over the photo, his touch trembling, then put it away. This blind date, he didn't expect much, but at least it made him feel like he was trying to step out of the safe zone he'd lived in for 4 years, where all he did was be a father, work, cook, read bedtime stories, and stay up late by the window, thinking about the life that could have been. The woman arrived moments later, a soft gust of air as the restaurant door opened, her sleek brown hair falling over her shoulders, her heels tapping the wooden floor in a confident rhythm, like the heartbeat of someone who had never doubted themselves. She wore a fitted red dress, matching lipstick, and makeup done with the precision of a woman who knew exactly the advantage her beauty gave her. She scanned the room, saw him, and walked over. Daniel stood, offering a polite smile. She sat down and introduced herself, her voice carrying a slight hurriedness, as if this were just one of 10 tasks she needed to complete today. Daniel tried to remain gentle in manner, even though he felt a little out of place in a world where everyone seemed better at pretending they were self-assured. Then everything toppled in the next second. Ellie's photo, because he had unconsciously touched it earlier, slipped out and fell onto the table, right beside the woman's hand. She picked it up, glanced at it, then placed it back down with the cool precision of someone realizing they had just been handed something they never ordered. "Your daughter?" she asked flatly. "Yes, Ellie. She's 5. She loves to draw." But the sentence never finished. She pushed her chair back, adjusted her dress, stood up, and said something light as air, but sharp as a blade. "You're not my type. I don't date men with kids." No apology, no hesitation, not even the smallest courtesy to spare the dignity of the man sitting across from her. Then she turned and walked past the Christmas lights, leaving Daniel behind in a warm room where his heart felt so cold he could have sworn he was back outside on the street, where snow fell on lonely people, without ever caring who hurt more. The jazz music continued to play, but Daniel heard nothing except the sound of his own heartbeat, heavy and hollow, as if some part of him, the part still trying to believe he deserved love, had just been crushed. He inhaled, straightened his back, ready to leave, ready to walk away from the place that had reminded him how easy it was to be left behind. He had just reached for his coat when a voice spoke, low, calm, and strangely carrying a spark he had never heard from a stranger. "Would you consider becoming my new husband?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel turned, and in that exact moment, when the golden light touched the face of the woman sitting at the neighboring table, he knew his life had just stepped into a chapter he had not prepared for, but could not look away from. For the first few seconds after she said it, those words that sounded like they'd stepped straight out of a movie Daniel never imagined he could be the lead of, he remained frozen, as if his body had been locked in place between the soft jazz and the golden light pooling across the wooden floor. A cold breeze drifted in from the window beside the table, faint but sharp enough to carry the scent of pine from the street outside, snapping his awareness back into place. He turned fully and saw her, the woman, the one who had just released the most insane question of his life, was sitting at a table right next to his, as if the universe had gently nudged her into that exact spot from the very beginning of the evening. She wore a perfectly tailored black suit, the matte satin fabric hugging the lean curves of her frame, exuding an effortless elegance that didn't need permission to exist. Her black hair was tied low, a few strands falling loose around her cheeks, softening what would otherwise have been a razor-sharp presence, like a night that was both luxurious and fragile. In front of her sat a glass of red wine. The light caught on its surface like a small, smoldering ember. But it wasn't the wine that drew Daniel in, nor the dangerously beautiful suit that could make a stranger forget how to breathe. It was her eyes, dark brown, deep and quiet enough that he felt if he stared too long, he might fall into a place he wouldn't know how to climb back out of. And those eyes, though her smile was faint, held a loneliness so real, so sharp, he knew instantly that her question was not a joke, not even close. No one with eyes like that would joke about marriage. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to find his voice again. "You ask me what I think you asked?" She tilted her head slightly, hair shifting to one side in a movement so natural it felt rehearsed by confidence itself, and repeated, this time softer, but no less resolute. "I asked if you could become my new husband." The air between them stopped moving, as if every sound in the restaurant had been sucked away, leaving only the thud of his heartbeat in his ears. He didn't know whether it was shock or her voice, low, velvet smooth, dark like midnight silk, or the fact that those eyes hadn't once looked away from him, but he found himself walking toward her table, sitting in the empty seat across from her before his mind could protest. She wasn't surprised. She didn't press her lips nervously. She didn't look like she was waiting for anything from him. She simply watched him, calm, steady, as if she had known this moment was inevitable. "You saw everything?" Daniel asked, his voice not yet steady. She nodded once. "And you think the most reasonable solution is to propose to me?" he asked, his mouth curving into a small, helpless smile. This time the corners of her lips shifted, half a smile, half an ironic shrug at her own madness. "I think it's the most honest one." Her tone was light, but he could hear the soft exhaustion beneath it. Daniel didn't know how to respond, because the truth was, he felt something far stranger than shock. He felt curiosity, and that terrified him more than her question. It made him realize just how long he'd been lonely. He leaned an elbow on the table, leaning slightly toward her. "Why me?" She straightened, fingers interlacing neatly in front of her, and spoke in a voice so even, so painfully sincere, his chest tightened. "Because I saw how you look at the photo of your daughter when you think no one notices," she said. "And because I saw the way you stand back up even when someone has just stepped on your pride." She exhaled softly, as though peeling away a layer of invisible armor. My name is Claire Hart, she said, 35 years old, CEO of a tech company, and her gaze dropped, the reflection of the wine casting a faint red glow on her expression, making her seem even farther away than the table between them. I can't have children. Daniel blinked. Her voice didn't tremble. She said it the way someone says something they've had to repeat far too many times, long after the pain should have dulled, though it never truly did. My ex-fiancé ended things 4 years ago, she continued, because he wanted a real family. His words, not mine. Daniel's chest constricted, not at the statement itself, but at the way she held herself together while saying it. And my family, Claire let out a short, humorless laugh. They have a list of men who are suitable for me to marry. Doctors, lawyers, businessmen, perfect on paper, beloved by my parents, and every single one of them only wants my money. She lifted her wine glass, slowly circling it, the motion graceful but aching, scarlet light bending over her long, slender fingers. And tonight, she whispered, I sat here alone, wondering if Christmas might hurt less if I tried again. Then I saw you, in that exact moment. Her eyes returned to his, deeper than before, truer than before, leaving no room for escape. I saw a man who wasn't abandoned because he wasn't enough, Claire said, her voice brushing against something inside him he'd tried to bury. But because he carries the love of a child, and people don't understand that, it's not a burden. It's the most beautiful thing a man can carry. Daniel's heart, already battered from the last 4 years, shuddered under the weight of her words. Claire continued, almost a whisper now. You have something I've wanted for years, a real family, a place to belong. She paused, eyes widening, not defensively but vulnerably. I can give your daughter that, and give it to myself. Daniel forgot how to breathe for a moment. There was something in her voice, raw sincerity without polish, the weariness of someone who had sacrificed too much to succeed, the loneliness so deep no one ever reached it, that made him realize her question was insane, but her loneliness wasn't. And whatever they'd seen in each other, that wasn't insane either. He sat there staring at the stranger across from him, and for the first time in years he felt something real beating quietly between them. In the moment Daniel sat down across from Claire, amid the soft clinking of cutlery and the faint scent of oregano lingering in the air, he felt as though the entire world had shrunk into nothing but two people, two chairs, in a very small yet impossibly crowded space filled with things never spoken aloud. The tiny lights strung along the wall reflected on the glossy wooden table, forming shimmering halos like little circles that had accidentally fallen from the winter sky. Everything felt warm, felt deep, and strangely, made him feel less alone within just a few minutes of sitting beside this woman. Claire slowly rotated the stem of her red wine glass, the dark crimson trailing along the curve like a streak of fire, and when she lifted her gaze, something in her eyes made Daniel feel as if they were no longer in a busy restaurant, but in some faraway kitchen lit only by a small overhead lamp. Intimate, safe, quiet enough for people to speak the honest truths of their lives. Perhaps that was why neither of them left the table. No one stood. No one pretended this was just a casual conversation. There was something in Claire's stillness, in the way she kept her eyes unblinking, in the way her hand rested near her glass, but didn't grip it. That created a feeling too real, too close, that Daniel found himself opening up without weighing the consequences. Do you want to hear about her? Daniel asked softly, as though he were offering her a small key, one he had given to no one else. Claire tilted her head, the golden light falling across her sharp features, deepening the warmth in her dark eyes. I want to, she said, if you want to tell me. Daniel exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for what felt like years. Ellie is 5, he began, his voice hovering somewhere between sorrow and gentleness, like a piano piece played by tired but honest fingers. She loves marshmallows, loves drawing rainbows, and she likes falling asleep on my shoulder when we watch cartoons. A faint but unmistakable smile appeared on Claire's lips, softening the air between them like a warm ripple. She takes after her mother, Daniel continued, his eyes lowering to the table, as if memories were reflected on its surface. Kate laughed before she even understood the joke, and she hugged me before I realized I needed one. His chest tightened with an ache both old and familiar. She passed away 4 years ago, suddenly, and from that day on, he swallowed hard, his voice dropping. It was just the two of us. Some nights Ellie cried, not knowing whether she missed her mother or just felt a kind of emptiness she didn't yet know how to name. I held her as tightly as I could. Many nights she would fall asleep, and I would still be awake. Not because I feared the past, but because I feared the future. Claire set her wineglass down very gently, a movement so delicate it was as if she feared breaking the emotions suspended between them. "You're a good father," she said, not like a compliment, but like an undeniable truth. A man who can love someone that deeply deserves more. Daniel looked up. More what? Claire didn't answer immediately. Her eyes grew distant, as if she were stepping into another room inside her own memory. A home that isn't so quiet you can hear your heart breaking, she said slowly. A dinner that doesn't always end with work waiting on the kitchen table. Someone sitting beside you when the streetlights pour through the window, so you don't have to pretend you're strong all the time. Daniel studied her for a long moment. You speak as if you know exactly what that feels like. Claire gave a small smile, beautiful but tinged with sadness, like a song that never reaches its final note. Because I do, she said, more than I'd like to admit. She turned her glass slightly, the red wine casting a thin streak of fire across her skin. I spent my whole youth building a company, 15-hour days, skipping birthday parties, skipping friends' weddings, skipping myself. She inhaled. And when the company finally succeeded, when I could finally breathe a little, I realized I didn't have anyone to call home. Daniel felt something inside him go still. I thought I could build a family, Claire continued. I thought I was finally ready, but when I told him I couldn't have children, he left, coldly, quickly, as if I had become a product suddenly marked down too much. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes were deep enough to send a chill down Daniel's spine. I want a family, she whispered, a place where I belong, not because of my money, not because of my position, not because of what I can give, just a place that loves me. Daniel didn't understand why his chest hurt so sharply, as if his heart were recognizing a rhythm it had forgotten. The imagined camera seemed to circle them, the golden light catching the shape of Daniel's cheekbone, then sliding to the soft curve of Claire's lips, then drifting to the table where their hands rested only inches apart. That small distance charged with something fragile and electric. In that brief silence, Daniel realized something he had never admitted. His heart had gone too long without the warmth of someone else's presence, and Claire's heart, elegant, strong, yet wounded, had too. Maybe they hadn't come here because of fate, but they stayed because their loneliness resembled each other's, and that loneliness had just touched. Claire lifted her head, her eyes shining, not with joy, but with resolve. Daniel, she said, her voice soft as velvet but sharp with truth. If tonight already began with something crazy, then let's let it be crazy for real. He narrowed his eyes slightly, not yet understanding. Give me your number, Claire said, leaning in just a little, her voice low but filled with certainty. If we're already being reckless, let's be reckless all the way. Daniel looked at her, this woman who was both strong and delicate, distant and breathtakingly close. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man merely surviving loss. He felt invited into something, a chance, a warmth, a possible future, and he knew, without saying it, that he would give her his number. When Daniel left the restaurant, the snow was falling harder, white flakes landing on his shoulders as if the sky itself was trying to remind him that Christmas Eve had never been a gentle time for hearts still learning how to find their way. He walked toward the subway entrance, his breath fading into the dark, his mind overflowing with more emotions than he'd experienced in any night over the past 4 years. But among all those emotions, shock, confusion, disbelief, The one weighing heaviest on his chest was the raw sincerity in Claire's eyes. The eyes of the stranger who had asked him the one question no one else would dare ask. Not as a joke, not on impulse, but loneliness can drive a person to speak the most important truths immediately, without hesitation. And that, more than anything, was what terrified him. When he returned to the small apartment where Ellie was sound asleep, Daniel turned off the living room lights immediately, as if darkness could somehow quiet the tremors rising too fast inside him. He didn't touch his phone, didn't open his messages, didn't save Claire's number, even though it was already there, glowing like the only red mark on an otherwise blank screen. He just placed the phone face down on the table. That night, he sat for hours by the window, watching the Christmas lights from the building across the street reflect off the thin layer of ice on the sill. He drank half a cup of tea that had gone cold without him noticing, and with every breath, he felt like a man standing at the threshold of something new, but too afraid to step forward. Not because he didn't want to, but because he had lost so much, wanting anything at all felt dangerous. He crawled into bed late, but sleep refused to come. Every time he turned, his eyes drifted toward the table where the phone lay motionless, its glossy surface catching the glow of the nightlight like an unblinking eye staring right back at him, reminding him that something or someone was waiting for him to reach out. Daniel didn't call. He told himself, "Tonight isn't right. Tonight is too much. Tonight isn't the moment." But the truth was this: I'm scared. The next morning, he still didn't call. Daniel woke at 6 a.m. when Ellie touched his shoulder and whispered, "Daddy, it's snowing a lot." He smiled, lifted her into his arms, and for a brief, warm slice of morning, he allowed himself to pretend Claire was nothing more than a strange dream from the night before. A dream that had made his heart beat differently, but a dream nonetheless. Yet as Ellie sat at the table eating her multigrain pancake and he made coffee, the phone on the counter seemed to glow even though the screen was dark. He didn't touch it. He didn't open it. He didn't dare. All morning he kept himself busy, picking up toys, folding Ellie's clothes, checking his work schedule, jotting down tasks for the coming week. But nothing, not even chaos, could stop him from thinking about that table at Casa di Maclareno, about the way the golden light had fallen on Claire's face, about the most insane question of his life, about those eyes that held more sorrow than any person should carry alone, and about how she had seen him, really seen him, in a way no one had in years. But even then, Daniel still didn't call. Not because he didn't want to, but because he believed that if he pulled on this fragile thread too soon, it would snap. 9 a.m. While he was trying to convince Ellie to wear an extra jacket before going outside to take out the trash, the phone lit up and buzzed once. Not a text, a call. The name on the screen, Claire Hart. Daniel froze. Ellie looked up. "Daddy, who's calling?" He swallowed. "A friend." His hand trembled as he picked up the phone. "Hello?" he said, trying to sound normal, but his voice was still rough, still tired, still hoping. There was a brief silence on the other end, the kind of silence that comes after someone has thought long and hard before dialing. Then Claire's voice came through, low and calm like the night before, but with something softer now, something closer. "You're overthinking." Daniel let out a laugh, a real one, warm in a way he didn't know he still possessed after 4 years. "You think so?" he asked. "I know so," Claire replied, "because I'm overthinking too. Last night and all morning." Daniel leaned against the counter, closing his eyes. His heart softened with every word she spoke. Claire inhaled gently, then added, "But I still want to meet your daughter." Daniel's heart skipped. Fear rose. But so did something else, something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. Hope. "Why?" he whispered. "Because I don't want a crazy night to end unfinished," Claire said. "Because I think maybe I owe myself a chance, and I think you owe yourself one too." Daniel was silent long enough to hear the snow falling on the balcony outside. Finally he spoke, his voice trembling just enough to reveal the truth beneath it. "She likes Riverside Park. There's a little pond. Ducks." "What time?" Claire asked without hesitation. 10 a.m. Saturday. "I'll be there." She didn't add anything else, as if she wanted to say more but didn't dare push the moment too far. "Daniel?" she said softly. "Yes? Thank you for picking up." The call ended. Daniel stared at the darkening screen, and in that moment, standing in a small kitchen filled with the scent of coffee and Ellie humming jingle bells in the living room, he realized something he had nearly forgotten how to recognize. A spark of hope, small as a candle flame, had just ignited inside him, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't want to blow it out. On Saturday morning, Riverside Park glowed beneath a thin layer of snow that had fallen the night before. Winter sunlight shimmered over the not yet frozen lake, where a few ducks swam slowly, their breath rising in faint white wisps that dissolved into the cold air. Daniel held Ellie's hand as they walked along the path, her tiny boots leaving round, adorable prints in the snow. He checked his watch. 9:58. He wasn't sure whether he was excited or nervous, but his grip on Ellie's hand was tighter than usual. And then he saw her. Claire stood beside a wooden bench facing the water, her black hair falling over her shoulders in the soft white sunlight, her cream sweater making her look nothing like the woman in a black suit he'd met on Christmas Eve. She no longer looked cold, no longer looked sharply elegant, just a woman trying to open her heart, trying to slow down so she wouldn't miss anything. When Daniel and Ellie approached, Claire turned, her smile, small, hesitant, but real. "Good morning to both of you," she said, her voice lower and warmer than Daniel had ever heard it. Ellie hid briefly behind her father's leg before peeking up. Daniel bent down and whispered, "Say hi to Miss Claire, sweetheart." Ellie took a tiny step forward. "Hi," she said, her big brown eyes studying Claire curiously. Claire didn't lean down immediately. She slowly lowered herself, kneeling until she was eye level with Ellie. A movement so gentle the light itself seemed to pause to watch. Cinematic close-up, white breaths leaving their lips, soft golden sunlight brushing Ellie's cheeks, Claire's face gentler than anything Daniel had ever imagined. "Hello, Ellie," she said softly. "I'm very happy to meet you." Ellie tilted her head. "Do you like ducks?" Claire smiled. "I do, but I've never fed ducks before." "Will you show me how?" That was all it took for Ellie to light up like a Christmas tree, switching on. She grabbed Claire's hand and tugged her forward with zero hesitation, as if Claire were already familiar. Daniel watched the scene, and his heart dropped a beat in relief he didn't realize he'd been craving. The three of them walked to the lake. Ellie pulled from her coat pocket a small bag of breadcrumbs Daniel had prepared. She divided it into 3 portions, handing Claire a small handful. Claire accepted it, looking a little unsure. Ellie giggled. "You have to break it down. Ducks don't eat big pieces." "They don't," Claire tried to follow clumsily. A chunk slipped from her glove and fell. Ellie burst out laughing. "Miss Claire draws ugly and feeds ducks ugly too." Daniel almost choked on a laugh. Claire, instead of being embarrassed, laughed with her. A real laugh, round and bright, so beautiful that Daniel froze for a moment. "I admit I am the clumsiest person in this park today," Claire said, trying to toss a piece correctly. It landed, 2 feet away from the duck. Ellie doubled over, laughing. The morning grew warmer despite the cold. Ellie's laughter rang across the lake like a little bell. Daniel stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets, watching while trying to hide the tightness rising in his chest. It had been so long since he'd seen Ellie laugh like that. Not the polite smile she used when adults asked questions, not the brave smile she used when trying not to miss her mother, but a real smile. The kind of radiant smile Kate used to call "my little sunshine." Daniel turned his face slightly away, inhaling the icy but clean air, trying to steady the emotion shaking loose inside him. Ellie came running back toward him, dragging Claire along. "Daddy, Miss Claire drew a duck so ugly it looks like a potato with legs." Claire covered her face. "I strongly disagree with this comparison." Ellie laughed so hard she sneezed. Daniel bent to wipe her nose, then looked up, ready to apologize to Claire for Ellie's blunt honesty, but met her eyes instead. She wasn't offended. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't trying to appear perfect. Her gaze softened, and in that moment Daniel understood something he hadn't dared believe. Claire was genuinely trying to be here, trying to get to know his daughter, trying to become part of something larger than herself. His chest eased. The gentleness spreading inside him caught him completely off guard. They sat on the wooden bench by the water, Claire in the middle, Ellie leaning her head on her arm as if they'd known each other for years. Ellie pointed at the ducks paddling across the lake. Claire listened as though every tiny sentence was the most important thing in the world. Daniel sat beside them, quiet. He simply watched. And his heart, after 4 years of tightening from grief, opened little by little with each of Ellie's smiles. Ellie suddenly looked up at Claire. "Do you like drawing?" Claire shrugged. "I do, but I'm terrible at it." "That's okay," Ellie said firmly. "You tried a lot, I saw." A child's simple statement, but it made Claire pause. Her eyes blinked once, her lips trembling just slightly, as if Ellie had touched a door adults spend years trying to keep locked. Daniel noticed everything, and warmth spread through him. Not intense, just like firelight dancing over dry wood. When the sun rose higher and the wind sharpened, Daniel suggested, "How about we go get some hot chocolate?" Ellie sprang up. "With marshmallows, Daddy?" "Of course!" Ellie grabbed Claire's hand immediately, her tiny fingers curling around the woman's, as naturally as breathing. And Daniel nearly choked on the emotion that hit him. Then, through the gentle snowfall settling on their shoulders like tiny white slips of paper, Daniel knew. For the first time since Kate passed, family didn't feel like a memory. It was forming, right in front of him. The smallest things are often the ones that strike deepest. And Daniel understood that more clearly than ever as winter in New York slowly slipped into February, leaving behind Saturday mornings wrapped in a soft kind of light, like a thin blanket pulled gently over the world, and the familiar sound of Claire Hart's footsteps outside his door a few minutes before 10. No formal arrangement, no confirmation, no. "Is today okay?" She came like a habit, like something inevitable. As if in the quiet machinery of life, the hearts of the three of them had been quietly rotating toward one another long before any of them realized it. Saturday mornings began with Ellie's laughter. Ellie, with her soft black curls, chubby cheeks, and eyes bright as winter stars, was always the first to run to the door. "Miss Claire's here!" Her voice rang out like a silver bell, and Daniel, standing in the kitchen, rinsing his coffee mug, found himself smiling without effort every single time. Claire would crouch down, open her arms, and Ellie would launch into her embrace. A small hug, but one powerful enough to fill the apartment, to turn it from a space echoing with the emptiness of 4 years of loss into something warm, something alive. Week after week, Ellie's arms around Claire's neck grew tighter, and Claire's posture softened in return, as though she were learning the language of belonging, and Ellie was teaching her in the most natural way. They ate ice cream in the cold, something only Ellie could convince adults to do. There were mornings when snow still layered the stoop like thick frosting, yet Ellie would tug Claire's hand. "Let's get ice cream. Winter ice cream tastes better." Daniel would laugh, ready to say no, but Claire would glance over her shoulder, lips curled in a teasing half-smile. "Let her lead the way." And so there they stood in the park, hands freezing but hearts strangely warm, holding tiny vanilla cones Ellie insisted they all had to match. A moment small enough to miss, but beautiful enough to be cinematic. A dust of snow drifting down, a soft breeze. Ellie in the middle, her little hands holding on to the two people she adored most, laughing so hard her eyes became crescents. Sometimes Daniel had to look away, not because he was sad, but because the feeling rising in his chest was too close to love, too close to happiness, too close to something he'd once convinced himself he'd never have again. Warm footsteps in the dinosaur halls. Some weeks Claire took them to the Museum of Natural History, and Ellie practically glowed every time she stood beneath the massive dinosaur skeletons. Ellie would hold Claire's hand, eyes round with wonder as she pointed up at the fossilized bones towering overhead. Once Ellie asked, "Are you scared of dinosaurs, Miss Claire?" Claire knelt, bringing herself almost to Ellie's height, and replied, "I'm scared of only one thing, not having someone to share moments like this with." Ellie didn't understand. Daniel did. And that one sentence slowed his footsteps, as if the world needed to pause so he could steady his heartbeat. Afternoons of drawing on the living room floor. But what changed Daniel completely were the ordinary moments. Sunlight filling the apartment, the sound of crayons scratching on paper, and Claire, once a woman he saw as cold steel in a tailored black suit, now sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hair loose, her sweater soft, bent over a drawing with a seriousness that was almost adorable. Ellie loved drawing rabbits. Claire drew rabbits. That looked suspiciously like potatoes with ears. Ellie burst into laughter every single time. Miss Claire tries so hard, but they're still ugly. She giggled, rolling on the carpet. Claire flushed, pretending to be stern. I am being bullied by a 5-year-old artist. Daniel sat on the sofa, watching them. One grown woman and one little girl, two souls who had both been lonely for far too long, leaning against each other in the afternoon light, and he understood. This was the most beautiful sight he'd seen since the day he lost Kate. Sunlight touched their hair. Laughter touched the walls. And every empty corner of the apartment disappeared. Claire became the unspoken piece they were missing. No one said the words out loud, that Claire was becoming part of their family. No announcements, no definitions. But Daniel began to notice signs as soft as breath. Ellie mentions Claire at breakfast. Claire's favorite espresso cup is placed in its own spot in the kitchen. Her coat hung on the hook as if it belonged there. A new scent, her scent, woven into the air, subtle but unmistakable, something that felt like warmth made tangible. Claire didn't force herself into their lives. And yet her presence, in some impossible way, gave the apartment weight again, like a house that was no longer hollow. But happiness always travels with fear. The most terrifying part wasn't that Daniel didn't feel anything for Claire. It was that he felt far too much. When Ellie rested her head on Claire's shoulder at the movies. When Claire laughed, not politely but freely, at one of his clumsy jokes. When she placed her hand on his back without thinking, as they crossed the street. His heart tightened, not from grief but from hope, and new hope always makes a person tremble. Daniel began to fear something he didn't dare say aloud. If he loved Claire, with the same heart that had shattered for Kate, did that mean he was betraying the woman he lost? He didn't confess it. No one asked. But at night after Ellie fell asleep and the apartment went quiet, Daniel sat alone on the sofa, staring at the espresso cup Claire had used, and felt a tightness in his throat. An ache only those who have buried great love would recognize. How do you love again without feeling cruel to the memory of the one who is gone? That question followed him everywhere. Not heavy, but persistent, like an old scar that still aches in the cold. Yet every Saturday, Claire knocked again, and Ellie ran to her, and the apartment grew fuller, and the air got warmer, until Daniel couldn't help but wonder, maybe new happiness isn't a replacement. Maybe it's a continuation. That night, after Ellie had fallen soundly asleep, curled up like a tiny kitten in her pile of soft blankets, her curls spilling across the pillow, her long lashes fluttering gently with the steady rhythm of a child's dreaming, the apartment settled into its familiar quiet. A quiet that, for years, Daniel had accepted as the normal state of a single father's life. But tonight, that quiet wasn't the same. It wasn't empty. It wasn't cold. It didn't echo with the ghost of longing in every corner. Tonight, there was Claire. She was sitting at the kitchen table under the warm golden glow of the small globe-shaped light fixture Daniel had bought at Target when Ellie was 2. That light softened Claire's features, stripping away the sharpness of a CEO, dissolving the hard edges of a woman who had stood alone for far too long. What remained was a gentle tiredness, a quiet pride, and something profoundly human, profoundly near. Daniel poured coffee into 2 white ceramic mugs, the steam rising in thin ribbons between them, like an unfinished whisper. He set a mug in front of her, then sat across from her. In that moment, the space between them was no longer measured in a few feet. It was measured in fears, in memories, in years of loneliness. And in the faintest threads of hope just beginning to form, fragile as the thin layer of snow clinging to the balcony railing outside. They stayed silent for a while before Claire spoke in a voice so soft, Daniel had to lean slightly forward to hear her. Daniel, when I'm here, Do you think about her? The question floated out like a thin strand of silk, gentle but touching the most sensitive part of him. Daniel set his mug down, his fingers trembling slightly, not from the heat, but from the truth waiting to surface. Yes, he said, his voice low, slow, and honest enough to still the air around them. Yes, I think about Kate, not to compare, not to push you away. It's just, sometimes I feel guilty. Like if I open my heart even a little, I'm betraying her somehow. He paused there, afraid that if he said more, everything he'd carefully pieced together over the last 4 years would shatter. Claire didn't interrupt. She didn't react with hurt. She didn't demand reassurance. She simply looked at him with the kind of gaze that makes people want to speak truth, want to remove the invisible armor they've worn all their lives. Then she placed her mug down, gently, as though setting aside a memory that wasn't hers. You know, she began, her voice just as soft as stories told past midnight when people no longer have the strength to pretend they're strong. My mother died when I was 12. Very fast, very suddenly. My father lost himself for a long time after that. The golden light reflected in her eyes, making them deeper, honey-warm. He didn't date for years, she continued. He said he felt guilty, that loving someone else meant erasing my mother. And for a while, I believed him. Daniel lifted his gaze, his heart shifting painfully in his chest. Claire exhaled gently, as if opening a long-closed door within herself. Until he met her, she said, and a tender smile softened her entire face. She made him laugh again, made him remember he still had a life to live. And she looked at Daniel with quiet truth. I was wrong to think she replaced my mother. No one replaces anyone, Daniel. They just continue living, and loving with the parts of their heart that have healed. Daniel held her gaze for a long time, long enough to see himself reflected back in it. The fear, the grief, the longing to believe in something more beautiful than loss. No one replaces anyone, he echoed softly. We just keep living. They looked at each other through the warm kitchen light. The moment stretched like a fine thread, fragile but full of an electric tension. Daniel leaned in slightly. Claire leaned in too. The distance between them was now only one breath, one small shift of a hand, one tiny decision that could change everything. His lips were close enough to hers that he could feel her warm breath brushing his skin. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Daniel could see it in her eyes, in the slight tilt of her head, in the quiver of her lashes. But the instant their lips were about to meet, Daniel stopped. He pulled back by the smallest inch. Just enough not to touch, just enough for Claire to understand he wanted to. She blinked, and Daniel saw it clearly, a flicker of hurt, small, fleeting, but so real it clenched at his chest. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not ready yet. Claire nodded gently. A thin smile appeared, a smile of someone trying to be stronger than their heart allowed. It's okay, she whispered. You don't have to rush. But Daniel heard it. She was hurting, just a little, and he was the reason. And that knowledge made him want to reach for her, made him want to take her hand, draw her close. But he didn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because the fear inside him was still too big, and the shadow of loss is still too long. They sat there a few more minutes, finishing their cooling coffee, each lost in their own thoughts, yet still aware of the other's warmth at a distance close enough to comfort, yet far enough not to wound. And though they didn't kiss that night, something had changed, an invisible thread between them. Something beginning to bloom, not a full love yet, but the promise of one. And sometimes, like all beautiful stories, everything begins with something incomplete, yet profoundly real. That evening, the elementary school hallway glowed under the flat white lights Daniel had always found a little too bright, too real, too unforgiving for the delicacy of children's emotions. The colorful drawings pinned across the walls, blue cats, cloudless rainbows, crooked houses bursting with love, softened the space somewhat, but Daniel still felt his collar tighten as he stepped into the exhibition room. Ellie ran ahead, her white wool dress swaying with each quick skip of her feet, her curls brushing her shoulders whenever she turned back and called, "Daddy, hurry!" Claire walked beside Daniel, not touching him, yet somehow making him feel as though in this crowded room, only the three of them shared the same heartbeat. She wore a simple cream sweater, her hair loose, her eyes lighting up every time she looked at Ellie. No one seeing her here would ever imagine she was a CEO with 200 employees who held their breath around her. Right now, she was just Claire, the woman trying to learn how to love a family that had never been hers. Ellie stopped at her display board. "Look, Daddy, Claire, look!" Daniel bent down, his heart lifting for a moment, and then he saw it. Front and center, drawn in crayon, messy but meaningful, a picture of a family holding hands, a tall man with black hair, a woman in a long dress, and between them, a curly-haired girl smiling widely. Underneath, in clumsy letters, "My new family. Not my family, not Dad and me, not people I love, but my new family." Daniel inhaled sharply, his chest tightening as though the truth was too beautiful to touch. "Claire." Claire went still. The moment her eyes landed on those three words, her shoulders flinched, a tiny movement no one else would notice. But Daniel did. He saw her eyes brighten before they blurred, her breath stutter like someone handed a gift she'd spent a lifetime convincing herself she didn't deserve. "Ellie," Claire whispered. Her voice barely existed. "I thought 3 people look more like it," Ellie explained happily, as though she had just completed a sacred mission. "Because we go to the park and eat ice cream, and Claire helped me draw last Saturday." In that instant, Daniel saw Claire press her hand to her mouth, as if to keep a sob from breaking free. Tears shimmered at the corner of her eyes. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet shatter of a heart that had been left outside for too long. But just as Claire leaned down to hug Ellie, a cold voice sliced through the room. "Well, that didn't take long, did it, Daniel?" Daniel froze before he even turned. His stomach dropped. Margaret, Kate's best friend from college, the woman who had stood by him after the funeral, who still looked at him as if he were Kate's husband, forever, and no one else was allowed to stand where Kate once stood. Margaret stood a few steps away, arms crossed, her sharp blue eyes honed like a blade sharpened too often. The white ceiling lights reflected off her face, making it clear that whatever she was about to say wouldn't be kind. "Margaret," Daniel said quietly, forcing his voice steady. But Margaret wasn't looking at him anymore. She looked at Claire, then at the drawing. "My new family." The words ignited like gasoline. "So this is her?" Margaret asked, her voice louder than necessary. "She's the replacement for Kate?" The air thickened. A few parents turned their heads. The room's soundtrack, laughing children, cheerful teachers, seemed to drift away, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. "No one is replacing anyone," Daniel replied slowly. "That's not—" "Not replacing?" Margaret cut in. "You let a child call someone else her new family. I'm sure Kate would be so proud." Kate's name pierced the air like a blade. Daniel's throat closed. Claire stood frozen, eyes wide, each word falling like shards against her skin. "I'm not," she began. But Daniel panicked, terrified of judgment, terrified of stepping too far into something he hadn't defined, made the worst mistake he could have. He stepped back, and he spoke too loudly. "Claire is just a friend. She's just helping. That's all." Each word struck like ice, sharp and merciless. He heard something break, in Claire's eyes. Her soft smile vanished instantly, like a door slammed shut on a winter night. Her face drained of color, her lips parted but voiceless, like someone hit in the chest and left gasping for air. Ellie grabbed her hand, looking up anxiously. "Claire, are you okay?" That tiny question was the second knife. Claire tried to smile, but her lips trembled, and the tears, real tears, spilled over. I'm sorry," she choked out, voice clenched as though something inside her was collapsing. "You don't have to apologize," Ellie cried, clutching her harder. But Claire gently pulled her hand free, a movement so soft it hurt, and turned away, walking quickly toward the exit, each step leaving behind a trail of pain that seemed to warp the room out of shape. "Claire, wait!" Daniel called, his voice cracking, desperate. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She heard nothing now. Ellie began to cry, the raw sound of a terrified 5-year-old shattering the room, sending a ripple of discomfort through the parents nearby, who suddenly found their children's drawings very interesting, as though staring hard enough might shield them from the truth unfolding in front of them. Daniel stood frozen beneath the merciless white lights. Whispers, side glances, murmured judgment. They wrapped around him like ropes. He knew exactly what he had done. He hadn't chosen the truth. He hadn't chosen courage. He had chosen fear, again, and in doing so, he lost the two people who mattered most in that room. Claire and Ellie's first real smile in 4 years. Daniel looked once more at the drawing titled My New Family. Those childish crayon lines now felt like an accusation. A new family. He had shattered it before it even had a chance to exist. And he knew, with a certainty that hollowed him out, that tonight he had destroyed something his heart might never find again. Daniel's apartment had never been truly noisy, but it had always held the small sounds that made it feel alive. Ellie's tiny footsteps running across the living room, her soft humming of children's songs while she drew, her bright giggles when she accidentally knocked over a jar of crayons. And, in recent weeks, Claire's gentle voice threading itself through the quiet spaces of the home, as though her presence had been born to fill the silence between father and daughter. But then a week passed after the gallery night. A long week, so long it felt heavy with the weight of years. The home went quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't bring peace. The kind of quiet that felt like a damp blanket pressed over his chest, making each breath difficult. No familiar knock on Saturday evenings. No, Ellie laughed as she rushed to hug Claire. No soft clink of spoons against ceramic mugs as Claire and Daniel sat drinking tea late at night, talking about work, about Ellie, or about the things they weren't brave enough to name yet. Just the low hum of the heater and an emptiness that grew a little bigger every day. Ellie noticed it first. On Sunday morning, as Daniel poured milk into her cereal bowl, she looked up, her brown eyes, usually bright, now blurred like a thin layer of mist. "Daddy, why isn't Miss Claire coming anymore?" Daniel turned away instantly, as if meeting her eyes might make his heart split open. "She's just a little busy, sweetheart," he said, voice painfully calm. "Maybe next week." "But you said that last week, too." Ellie lowered her head, the spoon in her hand falling still. Did I do something wrong? That question, simple, honest, unbearably pure, made the floor tilt beneath Daniel's feet. "No," he said immediately, so quickly his voice trembled. "No, Ellie, you didn't do anything wrong. Not at all." But Ellie didn't look at him. She only nodded softly and continued eating in silence. A silence that reminded Daniel of the early days after her mother died, when Ellie was too young to put her sadness into words, and silence became the only shape her fear could take. The whole week passed like that. Every afternoon after school, Ellie would ask, "Is Miss Claire coming today? Did you call her? Is she mad at me?" And Daniel, out of guilt, out of sorrow, out of not knowing how to fix what he had broken, kept giving gentle, useless answers he hated himself for. By Saturday, when Ellie was sitting in her art room, a room once bursting with color, but now strangely hollow without a certain someone, Daniel walked in to check on her, only to find she wasn't there. He searched the apartment. Finally, he saw it. A small pink paper stuck to the door of her bedroom, the kind used for Valentine's Day crafts at school, the edges still uneven where her little hands had cut them. Daniel froze. The pink note, written in purple crayon, wobbly and uneven but earnest. "I want Miss Claire to be my new mom." Just 8 words. But they struck him so hard he had to brace a hand against the doorframe to stay upright. For a moment, every sound in the world vanished, leaving only the slow, heavy thud of his heartbeat, growing faster as a week's worth of buried emotion surged up all at once. Ellie wanted Claire, not as a visitor, not as just another caring adult, but as a mother. The mother she had missed, had needed, had looked for with longing eyes whenever she saw other families. And Daniel, he understood then that he had broken something precious, not because he loved Kate, not because he feared judgment from others, but because of guilt. a guilt that had followed him for 4 years like a shadow too loyal to leave. He had feared that loving someone else meant betraying his wife's memory. He feared people would think he was replacing the woman he had once loved. But now, holding the trembling pink note in his hand, he realized something he had been too slow to understand. Claire wasn't replacing Kate. She had never tried to. No one could ever replace the woman who was gone. But just as true, no one could replace the joy, the warmth, the kindness Claire had brought into this home, into Ellie's life, into his own life. Daniel sat on the edge of Ellie's bed, the pink note still in his hand. He stared at the wobbly letters only a child could write, pure and defenseless, and for the first time, he allowed himself to think something he had never dared. If Kate were still alive, she would want this. She would want Ellie to be happy. She would want him happy. She would want their home filled with laughter, not memories alone. A tear fell onto the pink paper, not out of sorrow, but because a truth long buried finally stepped out of the shadows. Daniel closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and pressed the note to his chest like a vow. He would fight for Ellie, for Claire, for the family they had begun creating without needing to name it. And as he stood, picking up his phone, the familiar fear in his chest was gone. In its place was resolved, quiet but fierce enough that Daniel knew. No matter how much snow fell, no matter how long the past tried to hold him back, he would walk through it to find Claire, and he would not let her slip away again. Snow fell so thickly it blurred into a single white veil, draping the quiet neighborhood where Claire lived. Daniel stood at the foot of the wooden steps leading to her second-floor apartment, his breath forming small clouds that dissolved into the air, his heart pounding as if every beat were a plea to step back into the orbit he himself had broken out of fear. It had taken him a week to understand he couldn't live another day inside this silence, couldn't bear Ellie's sad eyes, couldn't take another night sitting on the sofa with his hands hovering above his phone, aching to say Claire's name, yet falling helplessly to his sides, because he had ruined the best thing to happen to him and his daughter in years. A week that felt like an entire winter. When the door finally opened, Claire stood there, her hair slightly disheveled as if she had cried or fought hard against crying, her eyes rimmed red, yet still carrying that fierce, familiar strength. The strength of someone who has lived her whole life getting up alone after every fall. "What do you want?" Her voice was cold, thin, but not strong enough to hide the hurt bleeding through each syllable. Daniel drew a deep breath. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the terror that if she shut the door now, he might never be able to open her heart again. "I want you," he said, without detours, without mass, without fear of being wounded anymore. "And I'm here to tell you everything I should have said a long time ago." Claire didn't move. The warm yellow light behind her cast a halo around her hair, and the snow behind him felt like a cinematic backdrop that made this moment unreal, or perhaps too real for him to breathe properly. "I love you, Claire." His voice came out rough, like a confession scraped raw. "I love you in a way I didn't think I could ever love anyone after Kate." Claire's eyes narrowed, and Daniel saw a shiver run across her lashes, the smallest signal of the war raging inside her. "Ellie loves you," he continued, softer but resolute. "She doesn't just like you, she needs you. You make her laugh, in a way I thought was gone forever when Kate died." Claire swallowed, her throat tightening as though every word he spoke touched something tender and bruised inside her. Daniel stepped up one stair, snow settling into his hair, melting there as though winter itself was trying to soothe whatever couldn't be touched. "No one is replacing anyone," he said slowly, each word set down like a brick repairing a wall he had knocked over. "You're not replacing Kate. You never have. You're you, the woman strong enough, kind enough, alive enough that I still don't understand why God would let me meet you at the exact moment I'd almost stopped believing in anything good." Claire gripped the edge of the door as if letting go would collapse every defense she had left. "How do I know?" she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since he'd known her. "How do I know you won't do it again? Push me away the next time someone judges you? The next time your past threatens this?" Daniel stepped closer. The cold wind whipped around them, but he felt only her. You don't know, he admitted, so honestly it frightened him too. I don't either. I'm not perfect. I don't have guarantees or pretty promises. He placed his hand against his chest. But I know this. I will fight for you. For Ellie. For us. I won't run anymore. He paused, eyes holding hers. You're the first thing in 4 years that makes me want to move forward, instead of just survive. Claire inhaled sharply, as a string pulled too tight finally loosening. Her head shook slightly, as if she were trying to stop herself from leaping into the warmth she craved. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pink piece of paper, the one Ellie had taped to her bedroom door. Claire recognized Ellie's handwriting, and tears filled her eyes instantly. I want Miss Claire to be my new mom. A tear slid down Claire's cheek before she could blink it away. Daniel spoke softly, as though whispering into the deepest fracture of her heart. She loves you, Claire, and so do I. Not to fill a void, not to replace someone, but because you are you. Claire's hand slipped from the doorframe. Her heart, tired, guarded, fractured, shifted toward him half a beat. Daniel extended his hand, slowly, gently, as though touching her too quickly might make her disappear. Claire. His voice dropped to something only the two of them could hear. Please, if even one small part of you wants to believe this, just one, then step toward me. Claire looked at him, at the snow tangled in his hair, at the mist of his breath in the air, at the eyes that held no armor, despite the past that had torn him apart. And then, like a dam breaking after years of holding, she stepped out of the doorway and fell into his arms. Daniel wrapped her up as though he'd been waiting for this moment across countless long nights. Claire buried her face in his chest, her sobs soft, yet sharp enough to hurt him and heal him at the same time. When she finally looked up, eyes swollen, lips trembling open, Daniel knew no more words were needed. The kiss came like release, fierce, aching, real enough to make the snow around them seem to pause midair. A kiss between two people who had lost everything, now finding each other. In that moment, Daniel knew. He had chosen right, and this time, he would not lose her again. Daniel had always believed there were doors one never walked through twice, unless their heart needed a forgiveness greater than themselves. And tonight, as he pushed open the glass doors of Casa di Maclareno, the tiny bell chiming exactly as it had that fateful Christmas Eve, he realized he wasn't just returning to a place. He was returning to himself, to the parts he had abandoned when fear won. Claire stepped in behind him, hesitant, as if afraid memories still clung to the warm golden light. But when the glow touched her face, soft, fragile, strong all at once, Daniel knew that if he hadn't brought her here, his heart would never know peace again. The restaurant glowed like a repeated dream, strings of lights draped along the walls. The scent of rosemary and sautéed garlic drifting through the air. The jazz music flowing like warm water through every unfinished story. But tonight, everything felt stiller, gentler, as though the whole space were holding its breath, waiting for them to repair what once broke. When Daniel led Claire to the exact table where she had asked him the craziest question of his life, she froze. He saw her swallow, saw her fingers tighten around her purse strap. She was still brave, as she always was, but the memory of pain still flickered in her eyes. You want us to sit here? She asked softly, though her voice didn't tremble. Daniel pulled her chair out. When she sat, he took the seat across from her, placing both hands on the table like a silent vow. I want to start over, Daniel said, right where everything once went wrong. The golden light brushed across Claire's face, and in that long moment, Daniel saw everything, the hurt she tried to hide, the love she didn't dare name, the vulnerability reserved only for those who truly matter. He reached out, placing his hand on the table, palm open, no pressure, no demand, just a quiet invitation. I'm not proposing, Daniel said, his voice low and sincere enough to slow the entire room, but I am asking you to become our family. A spark lit in Claire's eyes. Pain, hope, longing, and love. She opened her mouth to speak, but the restaurant door swung open. Cold air rushed in, and the person who stepped inside wasn't a customer. It was Emily, Kate's younger sister. Daniel rose instinctively. Claire stiffened, shrinking back into her chair, as if an old wound had been struck straight through. But Emily smiled a warm smile that melted the thin frost hanging in the air between them. "I have something you need," she said, stepping aside. Behind her was a small figure in a pale pink knitted coat, holding a white teddy bear, eyes brighter than the Christmas lights themselves. Ellie. She ran straight to Claire, no hesitation, no fear, as if she had finally found her missing puzzle piece after months of searching. "Miss Claire!" Ellie squealed, wrapping her arms around Claire's legs with the full conviction of a child who believes love is simple. "I missed you!" Claire knelt, and when her face met Ellie's, her tears finally broke free. They fell like the snow outside, soft, quiet, but loud enough for Daniel to feel his heart crack and mend all at once. "Thank you," Emily said to Claire, her voice more sincere than Daniel had ever heard. "Thank you for loving Ellie. I believe my sister would be happy knowing he found someone like you." Like you. Simple words, but for Claire, they meant everything. It was the first time someone connected to Kate, the woman Claire had once feared she could never stand beside in Daniel's story. That opened a place for her in that circle. Claire covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Ellie looked up, her eyes shimmering like a small lake lit by 1,000 lights. "Miss Claire!" Her voice trembled, thin as a thread but strong enough to pull two adult hearts together. "Will you be my new mom?" Everything stopped. Time stepped aside. Only 3 souls remained, a past, a present, and a future connecting right there at the table where the first spark of magic had appeared. Claire burst into tears. Not the shattered kind, she cried when she walked away, but the kind born when a heart finally finds a place to rest. "I've been waiting for you to ask me that," she whispered, pulling Ellie into her arms. Daniel stepped forward, kneeling beside them, wrapping his arms around both. Ellie squeezed his hand. Claire leaned into his shoulder for the first time without caution, without fear of taking up space, without fear of being the one who came after. Behind them, the Christmas lights shimmered softly, glittering like memories, finally falling into their rightful places. Ellie's drawings, Saturday mornings, Claire's quiet tears, Daniel's mistakes, and every small moment that had led the 3 of them to this one. A miracle, not the kind born from the sky, but from hearts that had once broken, yet still chose to believe. Daniel placed a hand on Claire's back. She took his hand, steady, sure, and he knew. From this moment on, they were no longer 3 separate pieces. They were a family, a new one. Imperfect, but real, and born not from an ending, but from the place that had once felt like one. 3 months passed so quickly that even Daniel, who once believed time could only move through sighs, drained nights, and lonely mornings, found himself realizing that his life had changed hue, as if an invisible hand had brushed a warm, hopeful layer of light over an old, faded canvas. Winter had almost melted away, but the warmth in their little home, warm like a stove's gentle fire, warm like freshly brewed coffee, warm like a child's laughter, didn't come from the spring outside. It came from Claire, from the way she entered the lives of father and daughter without rush, without noise, yet left marks so unmistakable that every corner of the house seemed to breathe her presence. That morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen curtains, laying soft golden strokes across the wooden floor like the patient brush of an artist. The kitchen smelled of buttery pancakes, something Claire had been learning to make. And for the first time in his life, Daniel watched the woman who once commanded a company of 200 employees struggle adorably with a hot pan. She flipped each pancake with the concentration of someone signing a $1 million deal, yet wore a smile so delicate it softened every sharp line on her face. Daniel, standing behind her, felt something in his chest melt completely. At the table, Ellie, hair in a messy side bun, cheeks still smudged with crayon, was drawing a picture of 3 people standing in front of a small house: a tall man, a dark-haired woman, and a little girl whose grin nearly reached her ears. In one corner of the picture was a green-spotted dog Ellie insisted they would have someday. "Daddy, I think the dog's name will be Sprinkle," Ellie declared, in the solemn tone of a tiny artist. Daniel chuckled. "Sprinkle, huh? Why?" "Because he has spots like sprinkles on cupcakes." Ellie scribbled a few more strokes, then turned to Claire. Miss Claire, do you like chocolate chip pancakes or blueberry more? Claire glanced over her shoulder, spoon still covered in batter. Probably chocolate chip, she said, smiling as if that question were the most precious gift of the morning. I knew it, Ellie cheered, because people in a family like the same tiny things. Daniel's hand paused mid-reach, and Claire, usually composed, assured, unshakable, blinked rapidly, as though Ellie's innocent truth had just placed the gentlest kiss on the most fragile part of her heart. Daniel stepped forward, slipped an arm around Claire's waist as she set the plate of pancakes down. He pulled her gently against his chest, his breath brushing the warm line of her neck where morning light glowed against her skin. Claire tilted her chin up, almost instinctively. Daniel whispered, voice low and rich like freshly poured espresso, I love you. Such a simple sentence. One he once believed he would never dare to say again. One his heart had been afraid to carry for far too long. Claire turned in his arms, her gaze luminous as if reflecting the very dawn outside. I love you too. Her voice didn't tremble. It opened, like a door no longer guarded. Daniel lowered his head and kissed the side of her neck. Not a hurried kiss, not a desperate one, but a tender, grateful touch filled with quiet promises that he would fight for this, cherish this, and never again let her face the world alone. Claire placed her hand on his chest, feeling the heat beneath his shirt pulse into her palm, and she knew this was home. Ellie looked up from her drawing, lips pursed. Daddy, Miss Claire, are you making pancakes or hugging? Daniel laughed, not loosening his hold. Both, Ellie. Both are important. The kitchen filled with laughter, the kind Daniel never thought would return to these walls after 4 long years. After breakfast, while Ellie went to grab her jacket before school, Claire leaned against the counter, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Morning light shimmered in her eyes, turning them amber. You know, she began softly, I used to think a family was something I'd never have. Not really. Not in a way that felt like this. Daniel approached her and rested a hand gently on her back, as though touching something sacred. And now, Claire met his eyes, the gaze of someone who had endured broken expectations, empty apartments, and nights where the silence was louder than her heartbeat. Now, she whispered, I understand that family isn't something that just happens. It's something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice, by holding on harder than the fear. Daniel leaned in, pressing his forehead lightly to hers. I chose you. And I chose you, she murmured back. Ellie ran into the room, jacket zipped, boots clacking on the floor. She waved as Claire reached for her hand, and her smile was so bright Daniel felt the light of it fill his ribcage. The door closed behind them, and Daniel moved to the window. He watched as they stepped into the morning, one tall figure and one tiny one. 2 silhouettes bathed in sunlight, one waving with all her might, the other bouncing with excitement. He knew. He knew as surely as he knew his own breath. This family, their family, wasn't an accident. It was a miracle built by brave people. When he turned back to the warm kitchen, 3 plates sat unwashed, the smell of pancakes lingered in the air, and Ellie's unfinished drawing hung on the wall, still waiting for Sprinkle, the dog. And in that moment, Daniel understood a simple truth. Families aren't always born. Some are built from the courage to love again, even after the heart has shattered. That morning, in that sunlit kitchen, Daniel realized he had finally found what he once believed was gone forever. A place to belong, someone to love, and a future that was finally real.